So hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Megan. I am a licensed clinical and sports psychologist. I am currently located outside of Chicago. I myself was a student athlete back in the day, Division III, so a little different than maybe some of you. But still, transitions are kind of similar, right? Like going from a lifelong competitive athlete to what happens next after your collegiate career is over and you're entering the work world can be kind of a big transition for a lot of us. One that I think sometimes catches us by surprise, even with some of how that feels, right? To make such a big leap from what you've always known into something pretty new. So today, we're going to talk about that transition. The goal of today is to help you kind of transition from having a more or less kind of like external compass, if you will, like being very externally reinforced by your sport, competition, those things, how to use those skills and transition those skills into whatever comes next for you. For most of us, the work world or graduate school, things like that, and shifting some of those into what I would call like an internal compass, and using your values as a way of anchoring you in that. So today, what we will talk about is, first, we'll just review some common issues that might come up for student athletes as they are in this transition, or even maybe a couple months into this transition. Sometimes it doesn't hit people until after like summer is over and the next school year wouldn't normally be starting, or their next season would normally be starting. And all of a sudden it's kind of like, oh, wow, yeah, I'm definitely not doing the same things that I have always done. So how does that feel and what's that like for me? So we're going to review some kind of common things that might come up, some themes, if you will. Then I'll engage you in a reflective exercise, just a couple prompts to help you shift again from that external scoreboard or compass to an internal kind of locus of control and an internal compass. So helping you kind of develop some awareness around what you might anticipate being difficult for you. And if you're a coach or an athletic trainer on this, these might be questions that you put in your back pocket, things that you might encourage some of your athletes to think about, reflect upon, especially if you're doing kind of like exit interviews or exit kind of like an exit process with your team or your athletes. These might be things that you encourage them to think about as well. What you'll need for this, if you want to engage in the exercise right now, like during this time, and I encourage you to do so, is a pen and paper, just to jot down some notes, some brief thoughts. And then we'll end with kind of reflection of the themes, some key takeaways, resources, offer a little bit of time for Q&A if you have any questions. And there will be a kind of like takeaway homework assignment, if you will, which is an extension of that reflective exercise that we'll do together in this time today, which is, it's called the values clarification exercise, but it's again, kind of a way of anchoring some of your reflections on your collegiate career and how you're going to kind of utilize those skills and those experiences to transition them into what comes next for you. So some common issues after transitioning from sport. I'll just kind of touch on some of these main ones. There's about 3 slides here with kind of a variety of things. If you would like a copy of this, by the way, let us know. I think Anthony will probably be able to send that out to you, but we'll touch on some main ones. So a lot of the times when this is a big transition, right? For many, if not the majority of student athletes, and I should say too, like whether this transition is kind of expected, whether it's like end of career, like you finished out your last season. Sometimes for some of us, it's unexpected where there's an injury or a personal choice that goes into kind of like a forced ending of the career. Either way, if it's a forced ending, there's maybe a couple nuanced things or heightened experiences of like grief, other feelings that come up around like not anticipating that your career was going to end, obviously. But a lot of this is kind of like in the context of an anticipated end to your career. So I just want to kind of put that out there. But some of them, again, do apply to like when there's a forced ending too. So I want to acknowledge, there's a variety of ways in which we're talking about transitioning from sport here. So The top of the list is a loss of structure and purpose. And I think this goes for, regardless of whether the transition was expected or forced or, unexpected. Where all of a sudden it's like you've been so used to being on a very routine schedule with practices, having someone to tell you where to be at what time all the time, what to do, even having goals that are kind of maybe more or less like defined for you in terms of like, your performance in your sport. And so without that structure and purpose, many of us would go right into, again, like something somewhat structured with like work or graduate school, but it's really different. And so sometimes, what can happen is like you get hit with some aimlessness, like you're just like not really sure what to do with all this like what feels like extra time, right? Low motivation, feeling kind of like the Sunday scaries, or just feeling like on edge or like a little bit uneasy or anxious every day, just like not really sure what to do with yourself. So that can be a common experience. Sometimes unprocessed grief. Again, this one's really applicable for like if there's a forced ending to a career, but sometimes even with an anticipated ending where this can feel like a loss for a lot of people. Like you don't have that connection to your teammates anymore. Everyone kind of dissipates, goes different directions, separate ways. Your sport maybe acted as like your core experience or your like this core aspect of like your social network, and then all of a sudden, everybody's in different directions. So that can feel sad, it can trigger irritability, maybe even some regret or rumination on like past experiences. Sometimes, and these are all kind of like negative, if you will, kind of issues that surface. There's a lot of positive ones too, obviously. But we're kind of reflecting on the things that could be more challenging. So performance-based worth is another one where our self-esteem is really tied into our performance, our sport. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about how that also relates to like identity, right? Like if I've identified as an athlete since I was, 5 years old when I started T-ball, and now I'm all the way through my college career, and now what? How do I identify? Like who is that part of me that has been such a huge part of how I've spent my time and how I've related to other people for years and years, right? It's been a very important part of who I am, and now what? So sometimes that kind of self-esteem and identity there can be some anxiety, some emptiness, um, uncertainty around like what to do to fill maybe what feels like a void. Social dislocation, again, like when that social network becomes more dissipated. And sometimes that mental health stigma can persist where, especially for athletes, if we're conditioned to kind of think like, grind it out, tough it out. We put off maybe even like help seeking for certain things that might have been a struggle for us or a challenge for us all along, but because we're short on time, we're focused on other things, our academics, our sport career. We may have maybe put it on the back burner, if you will. And so there might be things that then kind of like bubble up to the surface once there's no longer sport for us to kind of participate in and take up like the mental and physical space in our lives. So sometimes like things like anxiety, depression, even substance use issues can surface related to that. So we talked a little bit a couple minutes ago about like the identity piece. So when there's like the I am an athlete foreclosure, when the athletic identity that's been formed maybe early on in life and childhood, even perhaps, feels void, there's like an emptiness perhaps, maybe even a sense of anxiety or panic when you don't have that kind of a salient identity, you're not participating in that in the same way anymore. There might also be kind of like a struggle to, again, figure out how to fill that void, either with something that feels very like physically, like that satisfies that physical like urge or competitive urge. For you, like, what do I do? Like recreational sports? I don't know. It doesn't really have the same vibe. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, what do I do with that energy, if anything? A public perception shift. Sometimes it just feels like, okay, now who am I without this identity? Like, especially in relation to other people. I'm just kind of like thrown into the the big old sea of the work world, and I'm no longer kind of like different in a way, like student athlete status carries with it some kind of like special, some special connotations, I think. And it might feel like, again, a little ordinary, empty, unfulfilling without that feeling like it's of, right at the forefront of what you do every day. And then, there might again be, even if it's a planned ending to a career, maybe it doesn't end the way that you wanted to, the way you hoped it to, the way you expected to. We can't all go out as champions. Wish we could, unfortunately. We don't, many of us. So maybe there's some kind of like unmet, unfulfilled goals, things that feel like leave you feeling a little bit of grief, maybe some even lack of motivation, uncertainty with what to do with that kind of emotion or that experience. That can be a common experience as well. The physical aspect, right? Like this is one that when I was an athlete kind of took me by surprise a little bit. And I don't know why, maybe I just didn't give too much thought to it just because I'd always been an active person. And then all of a sudden I was like, without my normal practices and without the intensity of exercise and trying to figure that out on my own and how to implement that and some of the changes that then come with like my body, food, all the physical natures of things connected to that. So sometimes, when we abruptly stop our training, what happens? How do we feel about ourselves, our bodies? Sometimes that can manifest in like weight gain, some body image distress. Again, we just like don't feel like ourselves. And how do we understand that? How do we cope with that? Injury management. I was injured during the course of my college career, and I tried to stay active post-college career, and without my trainers, a training room, access to that, it was like, oh gosh, where do I go? Who do I, luckily I have a best friend who's an athletic trainer, so I always text him. But sometimes what do we do? Like anxiety or injury management, right? So chronic pain, things left over from competition. What do we do with that, and where do we go with it? How do we cope with it? And then sometimes just like the years of training, the impact that can have psychologically but also physically on our bodies, right? So these, again, this does not cover the whole host of things, but just to give you a sense of like, if you're experiencing or if you anticipate even maybe experiencing any of these, if you think there's one or more of these that might be resonating with you more, might be more of a struggle for you. No, you're not alone, right? That this is a big transition. So the takeaway here is that this transition isn't just a single hurdle. It's interconnected. All of these things are interconnected and they sometimes tend to hit all at once. Again, this is a big change. And so addressing these things as such, right? That they are interconnected rather than siloed, can help you understand it better, and know what to do with it. So the next part of this is, again, kind of increasing your awareness around what kinds of things might you anticipate and how can you switch from basically like leveraging the skills that you have honed as a student athlete into, what comes next for you. So honing more of that internal compass. So if this is a time where if you have that pen and paper, grab it. I will walk through some of these prompts, give you a couple moments in between to do some reflection. If you would like to, if it's available to you in the Q&A in the chat section and you want to kind of like offer any reflections or things that might be standing out to you or any questions followed up from these, please feel free to add those in there. But I will walk through each one of these and give you an opportunity to just kind of take a moment, think about it. And then again, if you have reflections you'd like to share, by all means, feel free. So the first prompt to increase awareness is to think about what skills from my sport can I carry into the next thing, the next arena, whether that's work, relationships, my health. What kinds of things have I learned about myself? What like concrete skills can I leverage from my sport into the next phase of life for me in all of these areas: work, relationships, health? So take a moment and think about that. What's been the hardest about thinking about of life beyond sport? So is there anything in particular that you anticipate being a challenge for you? For many of us, it's probably like the loss of that embedded social connection, right? Through our teams, our teammates, coaches, trainers, other athletes. So what's been the hardest or what might be the hardest thing that you can anticipate in that transition into life beyond sport? If your season has already ended, how has your identity changed? Have you noticed anything? And maybe not, maybe if you were a fall sport athlete and you're finishing up your spring semester or quarters, maybe, you're kind of still in the normal routine of school. Maybe it hasn't hit you yet. Maybe you're still kind of doing some off-season training with the team, and that's okay. So if that's the case, I would encourage you to think about how do you think it will? Is there any aspect of your identity that you feel like might feel empty, void? Might that be a challenge for you once you don't have that anymore in the same way? And if you're joining us and you've had a forced ending to your career, this is a really important question, is thinking about how has your identity changed? Has it? In what ways? What helps you stay grounded or hopeful when things feel uncertain? Are there certain skills, things you've learned about yourself through your sport that help you cope with uncertainty? Sport's full of uncertainty, right? Are there certain things that you can leverage in that experience? Ways in which you can stay hopeful, even when things feel uncertain. Then the last prompt is, what am I most afraid of losing when my sport ends? And also, what might I gain? We've talked a lot about like some of the challenges, negative aspects of transitioning from sport here. There's also a lot to be gained. And that's the point of this, is to think about and anticipate the things that might be challenging, figure out ways that we can access resources both within us and outside of us to cope. And also think about that, like, so how am I going to make the most of this? What might I gain? Not just what I'm losing, but what can I also gain from this transition? How can I take some of those experiences with me in the best way possible? One thing that, when I was thinking about this topic and I was trying to come up with some of these prompts, and the thing that stands out to me the most, that I think most of us with athletic backgrounds can connect to, is grittiness, right? Being an athlete teaches you about mental toughness, um, emotional awareness and emotional toughness. It forces you to be gritty. It forces you to push through when things are tough, even when you don't when you don't want to do something, like when you don't want to get up for 6 a.m. conditioning in the winter time. and jump in a cold pool, or whatever the case may be, right? Like we grind it out and we learn how to do that. And there's an emotional and mental toughness that comes with that I think is very helpful to think about how you might take that into the next phase of life that comes for you and some of the uncertainty with that. Just life, adversity in life in general, right? That's a huge part of what the student athlete experience is about and how you might make the most of some of those experiences. So as I mentioned, there's an extension of this exercise, this reflective exercise today, that we're going to offer you. It's a handout, so Anthony will send it to you. The purpose of the prompts is to help athletes shift from, again, that external scoreboard to an internal compass for fulfilling that transition from sport into life after sport. The exercise, it's just prompts, it's just journal prompts. And then there's some kind of cues at the bottom of it around like circling words that kind of stand out to you, finding patterns in some of those experiences, reflecting on some of the good parts of your college career. And again, how you're going to take those into the next phase of life. How are you going to leverage those skills, those experiences, the feelings, all of it. So, please, if you would like to, if this topic is kind of resonating for you, or again, if you're a coach or a trainer listening in today and you'd like to take that and encourage your athletes to do it, please feel free and let us know if you have any questions. And the final thing I'll leave you with, and then we'll kind of leave some space for questions or comments, is resources, right? So once you're not connected to your university or to your athletic department in the same way anymore, what kind of resources are available to you if you find that you need more support? I encourage you to stay connected as best as possible to your teammates, your friends, your coaches, um, other athletes, your athletic department, your alumni networks. If you haven't already, hopefully many of you have been connected to like your career centers where they have connections to alumni, both athletes and non-athletes, right? One, for jobs, super helpful. But two, to stay connected to people who have similar experiences, maybe have gone to the same schools or come from the same program at your school or have been an athlete at your school, right? Staying connected is really important. It can feel isolating once we are disconnected from our teams, from our student athlete experience, and we're kind of like out in that, the work world with everybody else. So staying connected can be really helpful. Again, use your career center, your athletic department, stay connected to alumni. If you are needing more professional support post school, and not sure how to go about that, if you'd like to work with a counselor, a therapist, a sports psychologist, there's a couple different ways you can go about that. The first is if you have insurance or if you are still on your parents' health insurance, check your insurance benefits. So if you have insurance through, you have a new job, or again, if you're on like family insurance, check your insurance benefits to see what carrier you have and what you have available to you. It's probably the most cost-effective way to go about it. Alternatively, if you're looking for somebody that again is either a sports psychologist or a general counselor for like other mental health concerns, or just somebody that can help you navigate the emotional kind of roller coaster that might come with a big transition like this. The easiest way that I think to go about finding somebody in your area is to probably use what's called Therapist Finder. So if you just Google Therapist Finder, it'll pop up. It's a part of Psychology Today, which is like the magazine for mental health and psychologists. But in that Therapist Finder website, you can just pop in some specifiers like your zip code or your town, if you have insurance or not, if there's something or someone specific that you would prefer to work with, you can filter out those and it'll give you a whole list of people that you can then vet and make phone calls to or send emails to try to find who is the best fit for you. But yeah, once you don't have that like counseling center or even like your athletic trainers available to you as sounding boards, it can be a little tough to find somebody, and I would encourage you to utilize that. if you need more help, the folks at Mindflow are always available to kind of like help you navigate like that referral process. I would also be very willing to help anybody who is struggling with that. There's other resources, especially if you're looking for sports psychologists too, but typically most people after sport are looking for just kind of like general counselors or psychologists. So those would be my main, I guess, suggestions for resources. Anthony, I don't know if you have anything else to add or if there's been any reflections or questions while I've been chatting.
No, I think that you hit the nail on the head. That it's all great outlets for people to pursue if they need help. Some of the questions that we've received, I at least want to get to that. I know we're getting short on time, but as far as just drilling down a little bit further into some of the topics that you brought up, the first one is, what are some ways to keep competition and team camaraderie in your life?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we all have to kind of find our own ways through that, right? Um, a lot of people again can leverage it into the work world where they are feeling like they're competing with some of their colleagues for promotions or, competing more so with yourself, right? Like it maybe becomes a little less about competing against other people. And it's more like pushing yourself to see how far you can go with the things that are important to you, whether it's work related or, education or relational, right? Like I think defining what values you hold and kind of like trying to be the best version of you post sport, that's a huge kind of topic in and of itself. But that's the first thing I would encourage. And then if you're talking like athletically, um, there's a lot of ways to go about that, to stay, um, you know, I don't know, uh kind of like amped up in that like competition. I mean, I don't know about for you, Anthony, but I still am on like recreational
Yep,
teams. I'm
sure.
trying new things, like I
Right.
just, for example, like, I'm 44 years old and I just started playing pickleball.
Love it. Yep.
It was a new sport, and so like trying to get outside of your comfort zone. So like you might not be able to compete, or they might not have like a recreational team in like the sport that you've always played,
Hmm.
but go join a sand volleyball team for the summer and like meet new people, and it'll definitely, like, percolate
Scratch
the
that itch.
competitive
Yeah.
juices, right?
Sure.
So yeah, yeah. Or like CrossFit gyms, or I did
Yeah.
triathlons for a little while, and it was definitely, and I was not an endurance athlete. I played softball. So like the
Right,
most I
right.
would ever run is 60 feet.
Absolutely.
So, but like trying new things, that might kind of stoke the competitive fires in you. I would encourage you to think about that too.
Absolutely. No, that's a good point. I'm not going to make this about me, but when I graduated, like you just said, I picked up some other sports with tennis. Even though I played lacrosse in college, I played a lot of pickup basketball in leagues, and that was a great outlet for me as far as just maintaining that competition that you're so used to having on a day-to-day basis, and all of a sudden, poof, it's gone. And then you got to find ways to scratch that itch, like I mentioned. So, um,
Definitely.
this next question is really good. I like that it's pertinent to your specialization. So, you touched on body image and diet changes when you graduate. Can you maybe expound on that a little bit? Because I think that's a big topic as far as you're burning 3,000 calories a day. You have to consume, more than that to maintain weight, all that kind of good stuff. How do you navigate that change?
Yeah, this could be kind of like a webinar in and of itself,
Sure.
probably.
Right.
But briefly, I think one is to first, let's be aware of it, right? Like
Mhm.
if you're going from, yeah, practice and competing every day to not at
Mhm.
all,
Right, right.
or just kind of hitting the gym on your own. Yeah, your caloric needs are definitely going to be different. I think paying attention to your hunger cues is going to be really key there,
Mm,
making some adjustments around nutrition. So yeah, you might not be able to eat, get away with eating some of the things that you normally would when you're burning,
sure.
like you said, 3,000, 5,000 calories a day or whatever.
Right.
And so, yeah, you might have to kind of just be aware that some of these things might be adjustments, and you might not feel it right away. But having the awareness of it, I think is key because, for me, that was again one thing that kind of like took me by surprise and it didn't like hit right away because I think I was still trying to be somewhat active. But then as I started grad school and that started to dwindle even more, it was like all of a sudden I started to notice like, oh yeah, my body doesn't feel like it used to.
Sure.
I definitely am not processing things the same way physically. And what do I need to do to make those adjustments? So just being aware that like it's okay to have
Hmm.
to make those adjustments. If you are experiencing more dissatisfaction with your body as a result of that, um, or frustrations around that, or sometimes like other like problematic eating issues might surface where like there might be urges to binge or like restrict to try to kind of like compensate for some of that. If you're having any of those concerns, I would definitely encourage you to reach out to a professional to help you navigate it. Because again, it's a big shift, it's a big change. It's like having to relate to your body in a whole new way. And having somebody else as a sounding board who maybe specializes in that can be really helpful to,
Absolutely.
yeah, to
Of
address.
course. No, great point. That's the last of our questions, and then I'll pass it off to you, Megan. But one thing I do want to highlight before we end, as far as when all of this might hit or come to realization for an athlete, like you said, it might not be the day after they graduate. It might be a couple months down the road. So if you are an athletic trainer or administrator, I think keeping this webinar, and we'll send you the recording in your back pocket, because I think moving forward, if you do need to send it to somebody who's then circling back with a former athletic trainer, a former administrator to say, hey, what resources do we have available? I'm kind of struggling. I think this is a great tool to have in their toolbox. So with that, I just wanted to at least reiterate what you had already said, Megan, but I'll pass it off to you for closing remarks, and then we'll send everybody on their way.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you all for being here. As Anthony said, yeah, this might be something that isn't feeling as salient yet for you or for your athletes, but just having it available to you. I think the biggest thing is one, being aware that it's not uncommon to experience this transition as challenging, right? Don't underestimate it, or think that there's like, it's fine. Like, what could be so hard? Like I go from like the sport was the hard part. Life doesn't
Mhm.
seem as hard, but the transition itself is a big one. And I think just acknowledging that it is a transition, and not underselling that is really important. And so, yeah, if whether it hits you now or later, or if these are things that you want to kind of like, if you're a coach or administrator, like kind of pepper into the awareness of your athletes so that you can kind of get them thinking about it, so that, yeah, it doesn't hit them and take them by surprise. And I think that's the worst part is when it takes you by surprise and then it can create a lot of like shame or guilt around like, oh, I should have known that this would be more difficult, or why didn't I know? And I think we don't know until we cross that bridge oftentimes, like what might be the most challenging for us until we get there. But knowing that you're not alone, it is a big transition and that there are people out there who are experiencing similar things. It's not uncommon and there are people available to help.